What happens when centuries of royal tradition collide with the blunt questions of American journalism? That was the unspoken tension as Prince Harry sat down for his much-anticipated interview on 60 Minutes with Anderson Cooper. At first, everything looked familiar. Two chairs, a small table, soft lighting, and the signature calm of one of America's most respected news programs. No spectacle, no audience, just conversation. But beneath the stillness, sparks were waiting to fly. Anderson opened warmly, offering a handshake and a courteous smile. "Harry, thank you for being here." His tone was both formal and inviting, setting the stage for what seemed at first like a measured exchange. Harry, sitting upright but with a guarded stiffness, gave a polite nod. For a moment, the atmosphere was civil, even relaxed. The early questions were gentle. Life in California, philanthropic work, the shift from royal duties to private ventures, raising children far from the palace gates. Yet even here, a sharper undertone crept into Harry's answers. America, he said, felt liberating, a place where he no longer bowed to what he called outdated rituals. But there was an edge in his words, suggesting not just relief but bitterness. Anderson, a veteran of tense conversations, leaned in without losing composure. "But isn't there comfort in tradition?" he asked. "Stability, perhaps?" Harry's reply cut through the quiet. "Comfort for whom? Tradition is just a cage with better wallpaper. My family clings to it because it hides the cracks." With that, the mood shifted. What had begun as a personal reflection was quickly turning into a critique of monarchy itself. Anderson pressed carefully. Millions still admired the crown, he pointed out, seeing it as a unifying symbol. Harry dismissed the sentiment outright. To him, admiration for the monarchy was nothing more than infatuation with a fairy tale, blind to the machinery of manipulation and silencing behind it. Sensing the rising tension, Anderson redirected to family life, a subject where Harry had often spoken with warmth. But even here, the prince's answers carried defiance. Being a husband and father, he said, was his life, and no institution or press had the right to intrude. That led Anderson to the question many viewers had been waiting for. Wasn't there a contradiction in demanding privacy while publishing memoirs, giving interviews, and making documentaries that revealed intimate details? Harry bristled. "Privacy doesn't mean silence, it means control. I decide what the world deserves to know." By now, the air was charged. Harry crossed his arms, his posture as defensive as his words. Anderson, unshaken, noted that some might see that stance as selective. Harry fired back. "Selective? No, it's freedom. Something Americans should understand better than most." The studio stayed quiet, but the atmosphere was electric. What started as a polite conversation had become a clash of worldviews, one shaped by royal tradition, the other by the demand for transparency. And in that silence after Harry's final words, one could almost sense what was coming next. The warmth of the opening had long since faded. What remained in the studio was a chill so sharp it could almost be heard in the silence between words. Cameras rolled, lights hummed, but the atmosphere was tense enough that even the crew seemed frozen in place. Anderson Cooper, calm on the surface, recognized exactly what was unfolding. This was no standard interview, it was a battle of wills. Leaning in slightly, Anderson decided to probe deeper. "You've often spoken about your struggles with the institution," he said evenly. "But let's talk about your mother. Princess Diana wasn't just a royal, she became a global figure because of the way she touched people's lives. Do you feel you carry her legacy?" The question struck a nerve. Harry's jaw tightened, and his words came sharp and clipped. "Legacy is a word the media loves. You lifted my mother up, then tore her down, and now you want me to wear that weight like it's some crown I should thank you for. I am not her replacement. I won't let her name be used as a yardstick to measure me." Anderson absorbed the remark, his tone steady as ever. "Fair enough," he replied. "Still, many see you as echoing her independence, her challenge to tradition. Isn't that something you identify with?" Harry gave a bitter laugh, leaning back with folded arms. "That's the problem. You want me to be a symbol because it makes for a cleaner headline. I'm not here to be anyone's candle in the wind. My mother's memory belongs to me and to my family. Not the press, not the public, not anyone trying to package her story into a narrative. The words hung in the air, pointed and personal. Yet Anderson stayed composed, years of experience anchoring him in the storm. He pivoted gently. Let's talk about Lisa. You've said she's been a source of strength for you. Critics argue, though, that your marriage pulled you further from your family. How do you respond to that? Harry's eyes flashed. Critics? You mean strangers who've never spoken to me, who write opinions from behind desks as if they know what marriage means? Lisa didn't pull me away. She saved me. She freed me from an institution that was suffocating me. Anyone who can't see that is blind. Anderson pressed, still soft but precise. But if she saved you, doesn't that suggest that without her you'd still be trapped? Doesn't that give her enormous power over your choices? Harry smirked, shaking his head. That's not power. That's partnership. Something journalists like you rarely understand. You're too busy dissecting other people's marriages instead of living your own. The jab was sharp, but Anderson did not react. He simply wrote a note and steered the conversation again. You've also been candid about raising your children in America. How is fatherhood different here compared to the UK? Harry let out a sharp exhale, as though the question barely deserved attention. It's simple. Here, my children get to be normal. They're not photo props. They're not pawns in some royal game. And unlike back home, they have a father who actually protects them. Anderson tilted his head. So you don't believe your family would have protected them? Harry's reply dripped with disdain. Protect them? The monarchy can't even protect its heirs, let alone the spares and their children. My kids would have been sacrificed to tradition. That's not family, that's exploitation. Anderson gave a faint sigh, his patience stretched thin but not broken. Some might argue, he said carefully, that by stepping into documentaries, books, and interviews like this one, you're also putting them in the spotlight, just under your own terms. The tension, already heavy, deepened further. The clash had reached a new intensity. Harry leaned forward, his voice sharper than before. I don't need to reconcile anything. I decide what's best for my family. Not the media, not the crown, and certainly not you. The air in the studio seemed to freeze. Anderson's jaw tightened, though his words remained calm. It seems, Harry, that whenever accountability comes up, you bring the focus back to control. Do you believe there's space for balance? Harry's smile widened into something closer to a sneer. Balance is an illusion. Either you control your story, or your story controls you. I won't be a victim of narrative anymore. That's your world, not mine. You thrive on prodding into other people's lives. For the first time, Anderson's expression betrayed the faintest flicker of irritation. He let the silence stretch, giving Harry space to lean into his defiance. Finally, he asked with deliberate calm, Then let's look forward. What does life look like for Prince Harry 10 years from now? Harry let out a low chuckle, dismissive rather than amused. The future is mine. I don't owe the world a roadmap. I'll do what I want, when I want. People can either accept that or choke on their expectations. Anderson tapped his pen once, twice against his notepad, his mask of composure still intact, though the weight in his eyes hinted at frustration. He exhaled and leaned back slightly before speaking. You know, Harry, I've spoken with presidents in disgrace, soldiers returning from war, families torn apart by tragedy. Do you know what they all shared? Humility. Do you worry that yours has been lost along the way? The words landed like a stone. Harry's smirk faltered, replaced by a scowl. Don't preach to me about humility. I've endured things most people wouldn't survive. If I sound unapologetic, it's because I've earned that right. Humility is for those still begging for approval. I don't need anyone's approval. The silence that followed was thick, heavy, almost suffocating. Even the crew trained to remain invisible seemed caught in the weight of the standoff. The interview no longer felt like a dialogue, but like a slow unraveling, every exchange cracking the surface further. Anderson steadied himself, pen resting still on the pad. His tone, though calm, now carried an edge. You've spoken about control and independence, yet critics point out that your book, your Netflix series, Even interviews like this one still circle back to the monarchy. How do you respond to people who say you can't escape what you constantly bring up? Harry's laugh was sharp, almost biting. Critics love their illusions. They need to believe the crown still shines. But let's be clear, I talk about it because it scarred me. You don't just walk away from something stamped into your skin. If I choose to expose its flaws, that's my right. If people can't handle the truth, that's their burden, not mine. Anderson lifted an eyebrow. But haven't you also profited from those flaws? Harry's eyes narrowed, his voice turning steely. Profited? Tell me, is it profit to reclaim pieces of your life that were stolen, or is it survival? I took back my story. If people want to pay to hear it, that's their choice. Survival isn't profit, it's justice. The room seemed to tighten once more, as though every camera, every light, every microphone was holding its breath. If people are going to hear my story, they'll hear it from me, not from the gossip rags you journalists cling to. Harry's voice was sharp, dismissive. For the first time, Anderson Cooper's legendary composure wavered ever so slightly. His reply was measured but tight. I don't quote tabloids, Harry. My job is to ask the questions people at home want answered. That's not the same thing. Harry tilted his head, smirking. Call it what you want. In the end, you're still digging. You feed the same hunger for scandal as everyone else. You're no different. The words hit heavier than before. Anderson didn't brush them aside with a smile this time. His eyes sharpened, his tone controlled but pointed. You've spent years condemning the press, yet here you sit again in front of cameras. Isn't that proof you still want attention? Only on your terms? Harry's expression curled into a mocking half-grin. Ah, there it is, the tired trap. Attention, celebrity, fame. Do you ever get bored recycling the same lines? Let's not pretend I'm here because I need you. You came to me. The arrogance in his tone sent a ripple through the room. A producer shifted in the shadows. The silence thickened, broken only by the quiet hum of lights. Anderson stayed still, but the strain was visible in his eyes. All right, he said softly, steering the conversation again. Let's talk about your mother. Princess Diana fought for independence and her own voice, sometimes against the very same institution you now challenge. Do you think she'd approve of the choices you've made? Harry's jaw locked. His voice cut through the air like glass. Don't sit there and drag my mother into this. You didn't know her. You have no right to speculate on what she would or wouldn't feel. Anderson didn't flinch. I wasn't speculating. I was asking what you believe. There's a difference. Harry leaned back, raising his voice. My belief doesn't need your stage. I won't be boxed into some sentimental soundbite for your broadcast. If that's what you're after, you're wasting your time. Anderson exhaled slowly, his pen tapping once against the pad before falling still. Very well, let's turn to Lisa. Many admire her, others are critical. How has she shaped you as a man? Harry laughed without warmth, shaking his head. Always Lisa. Always the fixation. Let me make this simple. Lisa isn't my idol. She's my partner. If the world can't accept that, that's their problem. Why not ask about my work, my projects, instead of regurgitating the same tired headlines? Anderson's thin smile revealed his patience was running out. I have asked about your work, but you keep steering the conversation back to grievances. With your family, with the press? Isn't it possible your critics have a point? That your story is fueled more by resentment than by purpose? Harry's tone dropped into a low growl. Critics again. I don't owe anyone purpose. I don't exist to give you or the public a tidy narrative. I live for myself, not for anyone's approval. The atmosphere turned suffocating. Anderson leaned forward, his voice calm but now edged with steel. And yet here you are on one of America's most watched programs, insisting on being heard. That contradiction is hard to ignore. Harry shot back with venom. Save your lectures, Anderson. You thrive on contradictions. Without people like me, you'd have nothing to fill your airtime. Remember that before you preach to me. The silence that followed was heavy, oppressive. Crew members glanced at each other nervously, caught in the weight of the standoff. Anderson's professionalism hadn't cracked, but Harry's defiance loomed over the room like a shadow. Anderson finally shifted in his seat, straightening his back. His voice, low but deliberate, cut through the charged silence. I've sat across from presidents under scandal, soldiers scarred by war, and families who've lost everything. Through it all, they carried themselves with dignity. What I see here, Harry, feels very different. Harry's eyes narrowed, his smirk creeping back. Dignity is overrated. Survival is what matters. And I've survived more than you could ever imagine. The words hit the air like stone, heavy, final, but absent of respect. The studio now felt combustible. The crew could sense it. The conversation was seconds away from breaking apart completely. Anderson leaned back, keeping his exterior calm though his patience thinned. The next exchange, everyone knew, would decide whether this interview collapsed or staggered on. For a long moment, the set was cloaked in silence, the kind that hums with unspoken tension. Anderson studied Harry across the small table. Harry sat with arms folded, chin raised, as if convinced he had won by refusing to bend. Yet beneath the bravado was something else, a flicker of unease, as though the fire he'd lit was now burning out of control. Anderson cleared his throat. His tone was steady but edged with resolve. Harry, let's step back. We've spoken for nearly an hour about family, choices, life in America. You've repeated themes of control and independence. But let me ask you directly, don't you think this defensiveness, this hostility, is doing more to define you than anything your family or the press could? Harry tilted his head, lips curling. Defensiveness, hostility? I call it honesty. Something your industry despises. The problem isn't me, it's people like you, desperate to shove me into a fairy tale. Here's the truth. I don't fit in your box, and I never will. Anderson tapped his pen against his notebook. Once, then let it drop still. He leaned forward, his voice cool but edged with steel. This isn't about fairy tales, Harry. It's about accountability. When I ask about your family, you attack. When I ask about Lisa, you scoff. When I ask about your future, you dismiss it. At what point do you stop pointing outward and start looking inward? Harry's face hardened. He leaned forward as well, voice sharpened to a blade. You sit there in judgment as though you know what it's like. To be hunted every minute of your life. You don't. No one here does. And you expect me to smile and bow? That's finished. I won't play by anyone's rules but my own. The weight in the room thickened. Every eye was locked on the two men now. Anderson's restraint, worn thinner with each exchange, finally gave way. He placed his pen deliberately on the table and fixed Harry with an unwavering stare. Listen to me, Anderson said, his voice low but piercing. I've interviewed leaders disgraced, veterans shattered, survivors who've lost everything and somehow rebuilt. Do you know what bound them together? Humility, gratitude, a sense of responsibility. What I see across from me isn't courage. It's arrogance. You call it honesty. I call it entitlement. For a split second, Harry froze, his smirk faltering. Then he scoffed, trying to regain ground. Entitlement from you? Spare me. You don't define me. You don't get to lecture me about humility. I've lived a life you wouldn't last a day in. Anderson shook his head slowly. No, Harry. You've lived a life most people couldn't even imagine. And instead of meeting that privilege with grace, you sneer at every question. You treat opportunities as insults. That's not survival. That's self-destruction. The words landed heavier than any before. Harry's jaw tightened, his face flushing with anger. You think you can shame me? You think I owe you explanations? I don't owe anyone, least of all you. Anderson didn't blink. His response was quiet, cutting through the tension like glass. Then why are you here? Anderson leaned forward, his voice sharp now, stripped of its earlier softness. Why sit here under these lights if not to explain yourself? You condemn the press, yet you seek its platform. You speak of freedom, yet every word is chained to resentment. You demand to be heard, but you refuse to listen. And maybe that's why you stand here alone, without the crown, without your family, and without the respect you believe is owed to you. Harry's hands gripped the arms of his chair, knuckles white. His reply burst out raw and defensive. You think you know me? You don't. You're just another scavenger pretending it's about truth. My family didn't deserve me. The monarchy never deserved me. Maybe the world doesn't either, but I'll still live my truth, whether you or anyone else can handle it. For the first time, Anderson's expression hardened fully. The calm mask was gone. His voice was cold, unyielding. Here's the truth, Harry. You're not living your truth. You're hiding inside it. You're not the fearless rebel you imagine. You're a man who had everything and chose to torch it. Not out of conviction, but out of pride. And if Diana were alive, I think she'd grieve at what you've become. The words struck like a blow. Harry froze, the smirk collapsing into pure rage. In a sudden motion, he shoved his chair back, the screech of metal scraping across the floor echoing in the studio. Enough, he snapped. I won't sit here to be insulted. This is over. Gasps rippled through the crew. A producer half raised a hand as if to intervene, but Harry was already on his feet, tearing the microphone from his collar, the cable snapping as he stormed off set. Anderson remained seated, eyes following the prince's retreat. Then slowly he turned toward the camera, his voice steady, almost somber. Sometimes the hardest truths are the ones we refuse to face. Tonight you watched a man who came to tell his story, and chose instead to run from it. That is his decision. Our role remains the same, to ask and to listen, even when the answers sting. He paused, his gaze softening as he addressed the viewers at home. To our audience, I owe you this. We came seeking honesty and reflection. What we witnessed was something else. Yet perhaps in that refusal more was revealed than any direct answer could have given. The screen held on Anderson's steady face for a final beat before fading to black. Across living rooms nationwide, viewers sat stunned. Harry had arrived to define his narrative, yet walked away leaving only controversy.